Welcome to the Sean Trey Show. I've got a really awesome guest with me today. Now, would you like to tell people who you are and what you do?
Sure. I'm Alberto De Icaza, and I'm a mixing and mastering engineer based in Austin, Texas, in the US.
Awesome. No. Talk to me. Excuse me. What does a mixing and mastering engineer do?
So basically, bands, especially right now, record their own tracks either at their own stations or they go to local studios all around the world.
Hmm.
And they send me their tracks. I make sure everything works together. A lot of times, I'm kind of like producing long distance with them,
Mm,
where, especially for self produced bands, we'll just keep a back and forward of what they'll send me tracks and I'll ask them like maybe record this part or give me this many more vocal takes or whatever. I can comp everything and then we can make a record from there. Um, but for the most part, I make sure that everything they recorded sounds good.
nice.
It works in the song. I work with them to make sure that their vision is actually going the right way, and then I master it so it's ready to be out, streamed and go out for videos or whatever they need. If they're printing vinyl or CDs, like I make sure they get that too.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, it was interesting because the mixing artist and mastering artist, because you guys are really it's an art for sure. Everyone's like mixing engineer. Gee, I should have gotten water before, sir. The mixing engineer, the mastering engineer, man, it's such an art, and I feel like we should call it as such because, you know, there are a million ways to do it, and to put a song
For
together,
sure.
and it's not easy. Now, how do you approach a mix? What are some of the things that?
Especially for mixing. I feel like mixing has more of a creative aspect to it.
Yeah.
Mastering, I try to respect what the mixing engineer did
Hmm.
and just, make sure it translates good everywhere. Sometimes I add a little bit of, magic sauce in there just so, it feels more special if it needs to. But for the most part, I think like mixing is it's such a creative process. For me, I just start with just kind of like very simple, trying to get a balance just with faders and with panning
Hmm.
and trying to really understand what the song is about and what it's asking me. I try to find like what's the main parts, what's something that needs to shine, what are good moments that that band does, or little things that are gonna be what identifies that band as. When you hear a song and you're like immediately like, oh, that's this guy or that's this guy playing. Like, what makes that band special, and what can I do when I mix it to bring that out and not hide it? You know.
That's interesting
Um,
because there are like a lot of bands or artists have a real signature sound. Like a really easy one to identify would be like Phil Collins.
right.
It's always he's got the strong vocals, but that drum, is always front and center,
Absolutely.
and because he's a drummer, as well, and so always those,
Right.
and it's bold. The drum is not hidden.
Right. And it'd be a crime to like cover that,
Right.
and just put him in the
Yeah.
back. Like that's such an essential part of him as a player.
Hmm.
So yeah, there's definitely a lot of that conceptualizing the song and the artist, not just the music. Like we try to serve the song, but also figure out what the artist is
That's
and what
awesome.
can we bring to the table.
That's awesome, and it is very. You think back through great bands, it's like uh, think of Van Halen or something, and Van Halen. It was interesting because Eddie Van Halen wasn't the lead singer, you know what I mean? He was
Right.
the guitarist, but yet the band's name was Van Halen, and the guitar was a
Right.
central part to the just the I don't know, the essence of
Right.
what
Like
that
the
band.
fingerprint of that band is definitely him.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and those guitar solos, or even Guns N' Roses. Axl
Right.
was the vocals, but Slash
Yeah.
wasn't
But you
Slash.
can
Slash was
hear
like, yeah, Guns N'
any
Roses, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, you can hear any band where Slash has been, and even Velvet Revolver, like it
Yeah,
still sounds like Slash, even though it's a very different band.
yeah,
Same with the song, the stuff that he does. Like Eric Valentine did a great record for him, and you can always tell it's Slash. So I feel like whenever you get songs like that, everything should revolve around that.
yeah. And that makes so much sense. And it's like, it's also one of the things that I took a class once on mixing. I am not a mix engineer, but I took a class once just so I could understand it better, so I could help mix videos better and just, bring some of those concepts in. And one of the interesting things that they talked about in that class was making space. And like,
Oh, I love it.
yeah, you have to, and I didn't understand that until I heard a mix that was really good. And what was it? It was they had us listen to Babylon Sisters by I'm blanking right now, but that song, it won a Grammy for one of the best mixes. And literally, there are all of these elements, these audio elements, and everything fits. And I don't know how it fits
Yeah.
and how he pulled that off, but it did. It's amazing.
Yeah, I mean that's the hard part. It's a lot of times it sucks because you have to make decisions where things are not supposed to sound good by themselves.
Hmm.
If you solo the bass or the guitars and stuff, you're gonna be like, well, I thought I had more high end. Like, why am I cutting stuff? Why am I narrowing all my sounds? But in the context of things, they only have so much space to, where they can exist.
Yeah.
Like Spike Stent is one of my favorite mixers, and when you hear his sessions, like everything is so like right where it's supposed to be. Like I'm sure even his drums, like if you were gonna solo his kick drum or just his snare, you'd be like, it's not as punchy as I think it should be, or it's not, as bass heavy as I thought it was.
But
But
together,
just the way where he's EQing
yeah.
stuff, it's like he'll punch you in your chest, feels great. The bass and the kick work incredibly. Where you definitely have to be listening to two things at the same time for you to get that vibe.
And there was
That's also hard.
there was a thing that I had interviewed uh, Chris Henderson, who makes Hindi amps. He makes like
Mm,
gear, and
right,
he had this really interesting thing that he was talking about when he masters a lot of the time. Like he'll cover stuff up. So
right,
he's not looking at things. He's
right,
he's forcing himself to listen to things, and he's like, it's all about the sound. And granted, I know he's looking at stuff, but uh, the
right,
vibe is what sounds good. And so often we intuitively know when it sounds good, but
right.
when you are painting that picture, it,
Yeah, I mean, Vance Powell has an incredible thing about that. Like whenever you're EQing on a console, it's like sometimes people think like you're crazy. You're like pushing, your EQ and your SSL like 15 dBs at 10K. It's like, what are you doing? But
mm-hmm,
if it sounds good, it sounds good. Like, who cares what it says on the label?
right? Yeah.
Just follow your ears. That's it.
Follow your ears. I love that. I think that'll be the title for this video. Follow your ears. That's awesome. Now, how did you get started in this profession? How did you get into it?
Um, it was almost by accident. I grew up in Mexico City,
Yeah,
and being a young kid, I was like, I want to play guitar, and that's all I want to do.
yeah.
Um,
Okay.
there were
Was this were you an electric guitar, acoustic guitar? What was your vibe?
I started with classical guitar, and then
Nice,
I moved to electric. I was always a huge metalhead. Like
nice.
I wanted to be in a metal band and do the whole band and tour. Um, but that wasn't like a real path of something that I could like focus in at the time over there.
Yeah.
Um, and one of my dad's friends had a production company, and talking to them, they were like, "Why don't you get an internship here? There's a studio where I send my stuff when I need things. It's across the street." So I went over there, and they kind of introduced me to the side of production,
Mm,
which I really like. That studio was more for they were doing sound for movies,
mm.
and the guys over there were recording their own bands, and that's kind of what I was more interested in. And I started seeing this whole side of the industry. Like, okay, well, this is cool. You're kind of mixing like music and art and also technology, which I
Yeah.
was always very interested in computers and whatnot. And of course, because I'm younger than a lot of producers, I didn't grow up with tape. Everything was done in a computer.
Yep.
So I kind of got really interested in that. I got hooked. I started recording some of my friends, and then I ended up moving to New Jersey. So I went there for college. And while I was in college, I was looking for internships, and I was just looking for, my favorite records, just looking for guys that did it and where they're at, and seeing who could I talk to. I was in North Jersey, so New York City was very close. I was like, I'm sure there's a million guys around here, um, and I found a producer Machine, who
Nice.
did Lamb of God.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Uh, so Sacrament is one of my favorite records, and I saw him, and I was like, oh yeah, it says he's here. At the time, he was in Hoboken, which
Mm.
is right on the other side of the river from New York City, right? So I started talking to him. I found an email online, and I just randomly, hit them up like, "Hey, I'm looking for an internship. Like, I can just go clean toilets, whatever." His engineer at the time replied back to me. He was Will Putney, who's also a great producer. Um, and I did like an interview with them and started working with them. And right at that time, they were moving studios, and we were starting a new studio in Belleville, which was maybe 10 minutes away from where I was living at the time.
Yeah.
So I was like, this is perfect. I'll figure everything out from here. So Machine really took me under his wing. We did a bunch of records over there in Jersey, and it was such a good space. There was a lot of very talented people working there at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And then Machine and I decided that we were going to move to Austin. So
Okay.
we came down here. We built a barn studio in Dripping Springs,
Nice.
which is right outside of Austin. Um, so I did that with him for a couple of years, and then I kind of wanted to learn more about the industry and do my own thing. So I started working for a label, and I kind of started growing my own studio. But I wanted to focus just on mixing at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, feel like when I was recording bands, like the hours were crazy,
Yeah.
and I got married, and I kind of needed something different. So I got my own studio, and here I am.
That's awesome, man. It's interesting. There's a couple things you touched on, and one of the things that you pointed out that there was this you know I sit right on. I think I'm a tiny bit older than you. I pretty sure, but I was right on the cusp of the changeover from analog to digital, and that was it was such a huge shift in the
Right.
industry of music and film and all of these different industries. Like shifting from analog to digital was a game changer for a lot of stuff because you know the first and foremost was cost. Things that were
Mhm.
so expensive before. I mean, whether you're shooting a movie or you're recording on tape, those machines, the tape itself, the film itself is expensive. It's
Right.
prohibitively expensive. Anyway, my friend Rob was working um, in audio engineering and in studio, and he was working with Quincy Jones when they were recording Michael Jackson, and he was like,
Oh, wow.
when they did one of Michael Jackson's last albums, he was like, they had like, it was an insane amount of tape, like the amount of tape that they had set. He's like, it was just rooms and rooms, and versus now,
Yeah, a flash drive this big is like
you know
90
that's
gigabytes
a
or
4 terabyte drive right there. You know what I mean? That would be like
Right.
hundreds of albums. And like yeah, one flash drive is
Yeah.
they got 1 terabyte flash drives now. It's insane.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Man, at that studio, we used to have this storage room that had like tools and stuff, and it had a wall of hard drives.
Yeah, yeah,
Because every record, like I think at that time there were like 2 gigabytes or 4 gigabytes was like
yeah.
the most you can get. So there were some for like tracking. There was like swappers for whenever we were moving sessions from place to place. Like
Yeah,
it was insane. I think Machine still has crates and crates of all these what's it called records and
that's awesome.
DVDs because that's how they were
Yeah,
backing up sessions back then.
yeah. Well, that's interesting.
Man, and
Go ahead, please.
it's insane. There was one session that I did with Machine where King Crimson has been releasing the records, like re-releasing the records in 5.1.
Yeah,
So we were, what's it called? He did the Power to Believe. This was before me, and then a couple of years ago, they needed the stems, and whenever we opened the sessions were done in like Logic. I want to say it was like Logic 4 or
Oh
something
man.
even before Apple had it.
Yeah, yeah,
Insane. The sessions didn't play, of course. Like it will open and it'll tell me there's audio here, but there wasn't a session.
yeah.
So we had to do a whole game of, exporting everything and then remixing it to copy the original
Oh
mixes.
man.
That was intense. That's a
Yeah.
crazy listening exercise.
The-
Definitely a lot of like, you have to go against your instincts because I want to make the kick drum sound this way, but that's not what the goal is.
the goal was to
I
sound
need to
like
make
this.
it sound like this.
Oh man.
So a lot of it was just tons of listening and figuring out where automation was and what stuff was getting banned. Because Robert Fripp's in the band, and he does all these soundscapes and stuff. It's like, well, really, what's going on? Was it him playing it that way, or was Machine getting creative? And he mixed that one on an SSL at the time, and it was like, is he just like automating a pan sand or something? So
Yeah.
crazy stuff like that, where it was really interesting. It was really cool. I love to be a part of it.
But I mean, at
Um,
the same time, that's like my wife. I help her because when COVID locked everything down, we suddenly weren't able to go to studios. We weren't able to go out, so we had our home
right,
studio, and I know how to help my wife record vocals, and then we would send it to people. But I didn't know beyond that, and so I was having to
right,
study things. And she's like, "Can you do this? Can you do this? Can you do this?" And every time that something was asked of me, I learned a new skill. I got better,
right.
and I'm no mix engineer, but my toolkit has grown. And that sounds like something that, though it is insanely hard, would be such a powerful exercise in honing your skills to create certain sounds. You know what I mean? Because we always mix to what we want it to sound like. But I'm sure that there is a degree of repetition in what you do. You
Absolutely.
know what I mean? Like, well, this is kind of how I like to do it versus, okay, I'm not allowed to do it the way I want to do it. Now I've got to do it this way, and it forces you to go.
Right.
Let's change.
Right. And it's almost like how there's people that can go to a restaurant and try a recipe and they're like, "Oh yeah, I can taste, this spice and like this
Yeah,
ingredient in
yeah.
here." Like it's like that but for audio.
Oh,
It's so hard to describe, but that's, like even when I talk to my wife is like so non-technical
yeah,
and like not into, the audio world. So whenever I try to describe these things, I'm like, yeah, it's just like that. Like you have a palate where you can taste like, yeah, there's, I don't know, it has turmeric in it. Like that's how I can tell you, oh yeah, there's compression in here. Or,
yeah.
there's a delay doing this, like hidden down there.
That's awesome, though.
Um,
I mean, it's awesome because
yeah,
it's such a refine. You have taken the time to um, refine your, for the culinary world, they would say to refine your palate, your ability to
right,
taste it. And so you've refined your audio palate. This ability to kind of perceive what
right.
other people can't.
And I think it's also Machine is incredible at teaching about subtleties and just really to listen to things. So he was great at just sitting down with me and showing me, we'll listen to this. Like, how about we move this a tiny bit, or just every record, for example, will have on the vocal chain. There was like a couple plugins with a gain plugin that
Mm,
just had like 1 dB up or down.
yeah.
So we can literally just like start clicking up, 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 or down, 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 and seeing where the vocal will sit. And you can just like close your eyes and click a couple on or a couple off and see where it lands instead of moving faders and messing with automation and stuff. So just stuff like that. Like you think 1 dB or half a dB is not gonna do much, but
No.
it does in the great picture sometimes.
Yeah. Well, you touched on a couple of things. I want to touch on that. That's really interesting. But I also want to come back to one of the things that you pointed out that there was this. I'm interviewing for a couple interesting podcasts. Like I built my podcast and I'm going to keep building it. But I've also had a couple companies reach out about coming and hosting their podcasts. And one of them is this interesting company. I won't say any names. But this company is focused on a new style of education. The idea being that schools and degrees are dinosaurs in a world where practical skills are necessary, and where people just recognize you don't have time to spend on all this other stuff. And granted, I studied in university and I liked a lot of what I read and learned, but I'm going to say that there was definitely fluff that was not needed, just extra stuff that was in there. And one of the things that you talked about, and this is something that I have said again and again and again to my wife, and COVID kind of prevented it. I said, I would love to find someone to train with, because I've watched so many damn videos. I have devoured YouTube channels, but you can't learn that way. Granted, if you know what you're doing, there are some cool things that you can see, but watching a master work and following their process, there's nothing like that. There's nothing like that. And so
Absolutely.
when you said you learned that way, that was really inspiring to me.
Yeah, same with Will. Like they were both very patient, and the way that they run the studio was very interesting because when you're an intern there, like you're not making money until you can provide a skill, right?
Yeah.
And the skills were it was something easy you will learn.
Mm-hmm.
Like for example, we will start with something called DTM, which was put a MIDI note in every drum that was hit, basically,
Mm-hmm.
and make sure they're face aligned, right? You can learn that. I can teach you that in 30 minutes. But if you don't practice it, you're not fast enough and you won't be able to meet the deadlines, Same with like vocal editing, tuning, aligning it, editing drums, just little things like that where everything was there. And Will was so patient and he'll sit with me and like literally go through like an entire session of, pop punk records that have so many harmonies and so many doubles and just color every single note where he's hearing like, okay, this note is off, or this one right here is like half a step off, and like listen to it and then just go ahead and fix it.
Yeah.
So you definitely like train an ear. Machine was always onto me because I had a really hard time. A lot of times when we were editing, like tuning vocals, like stuff will be, like a quarter to half a step off, and like in a stack of 20 vocals, I'll just be like, like it's lost. And
Yeah.
I'll be like, nope, I can hear it. Like, listen for this. It feels like this. Like, it was really, everything was put under the microscope. So
that's awesome.
And the other thing I really love about that was Machine was doing a lot of unconventional things. Like whenever he produced a Lamb of God records, he was not a metalhead. He comes from the hip hop world and he loves sampling, and he kind of want to bring that mentality to it.
That's awesome.
So since he was doing that, he's always kind of looking for new ideas or new ways to do stuff. And when I was in school, I went to college for this, and they can teach you all the theory you want. You're never going to learn what's cutting edge or what's unconventional by going to a college.
Yeah.
Some of them are great, and they'll bring interesting people to talk about, and they'll tell you what they do. But I can tell you that nobody's giving you their secrets in a college classroom.
No. and then that's interesting because I think my analogy would be this, and I think this is what the vocational schools, the universities are doing. I studied martial arts. I'm a black belt in judo. And I'll tell you the truth. What you learn up until you get your black belt is just the basics. You are learning how to control your body and how not to hurt yourself or hurt someone else. You know what I mean? But when you start getting above that point, then you start knowing what you're doing. Then you can start playing, then you can start doing creative stuff. But unless you have those fundamentals. But there's a difference. I'm no cage fighter, man. If I got into the UFC ring, I would get destroyed, because there's a difference between having a skill set and then knowing how to use it. Like there is a massive difference there, And even my UFC friends, like you put them into a different arena, they're going to be in... Is that your cat?
Yeah, my wife's cat's over here trying to get my attention.
Awesome. I was like, was that a hat? At first I thought it was a big fluffy hat. And I was like, that's amazing.
That's just huge.
That's awesome. My dog sometimes my dog will be really naughty. And so I put him out, and he's a real attention seeker. And so he'll go upstairs with my wife. And and like if he will just get annoying, and she'll dump him in the room when I'm in the middle of a podcast. And I have hardwood floors, and his claws are like. It's like when I'm mixing this in post, I'm just like, oh, I have to cut all my audio out when I'm not talking. It's just so bad. But that's awesome. But that's awesome, man. It's really awesome. But, coming back to that, there's a difference between knowing what you're doing or having a skill set and then knowing how to use it. So
Right.
it's awesome.
Yeah, and I feel like also the more you don't use it, you will definitely lose
Oh,
it.
sure, for sure.
So I'm a firm believer of like the 10,000 hours
Oh,
versus going to college or doing whatever university. Like especially in this gambit, there's so much information online, and a lot of it is like the information is there, but now you have to go try it
yeah.
and fail at it, or maybe you'll stumble on something great.
That is one thing that you're pointing out, and that is one thing that I was just complaining that I didn't have someone to mentor me. But at the same time, one of the things that we're seeing. So I came from the film industry, and one of the things that you notice in the film industry is that there's a very, very rigid way that people think things are supposed to be done. This is step one. This is step two. This is step three. And if you're not following those steps, people get really upset. And,
Right.
if you are not, I remember when I was coming up as an actor, this was like such a embarrassing experience. I hate even talking about it. And I was working at this one location. What was it I was doing? It was like a wellness center. And there was some of these really big Hollywood people that came through, and they were just really cool. We got to know them, and people were on first name basis. Hey, Sean, how's it going? It's so good to see you this week, And we were just really cool. And I had been training as an actor, going to classes. And one day there was this one great actor, and I had this new project, and he was always like, Sean, it's good to see you. So friendly. And then one day I was like, hey, I'd love to know your advice. Boom, gears changed so fast. There are plenty of other wellness facilities in the city. I could always visit them. And I was like, I am so sorry. But I was just like, wow. And what struck me at that moment was I felt embarrassed. But at the same time, what I realized was that the system is not built toward helping everyone succeed. The system is built toward kind of creating a funnel that people can control. What we are now seeing with the music industry and the film industry is that as people have access to creative tools, whether that be a DAW and their individual setup, or whether that be a Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera that they can go out and make their own movie. There's no one that filters them in the way they're supposed to be doing it. People can make things however they want to make it. They can make the music sound the way they want. This is something my wife likes. She loves ton of layers of harmonies, of herself singing harmony for herself. Kind of almost creating like a Wilson Phillips sound, but just with one person. And then when she does a duet with me, she wants those different vocal lines and harmonies. And we were working with one mix engineer, really great guy. But he's like, you're doing a duet. You can't have these layers of harmonies. It will look funny in your video. And she's like, I don't care. I like the way it sounds.
Why not?
Why not? And that was what, when you can do things yourself, when you have that permission to do things that yourself, when you have the tools to do things yourself, you can try things that are unconventional and yet become a new thing. I mean, imagine the first guy that sat down and was like, hey, what's this synthesizer? Let's run these electrical wires. Creating these odd sounds that people were like, at that time, like, what the hell is that? And then we got the 80s,
Right. And like you say, the gatekeepers are going down, but also all the software and all the tools you need to make records or to make a movie, they're becoming way cheaper than they used to be.
So cheap.
To the point that, look at what's happening in the past couple of years. Like Billie Eilish, one of the biggest artists we have right now, right?
Yep.
When you see Phineas Studio, wherever they did the first record, like it's a bedroom.
It is
with a bed right next to the. like it's literally what every audio engineer discuss about on Gearspace, saying like, "This is that's never gonna sound good. You're new. That's not But they got they got creative. They figure out their own thing. Phineas is incredibly versed on producers, and he understands. He has great taste, but he understands what he's doing.
Yep.
And I mean, that's another one that you don't think about it, but those records have an insane amount of vocals.
Yeah.
There's so many layers. It's
Well,
ridiculous.
the other thing
But
too is my wife and I had a nice mic. It was $2,000 mic. Middle of lockdown, it died.
yeah,
It died hard, and we were like, what the hell are we gonna do? And so I had a backup mic it was just for traveling, and it was just for laying down demos, and it was a very entry level mic. And my wife had this one song that she really wanted to put out, and it was a beautiful song. And I was like, this is all I've got right now. And we couldn't buy anything because all the shops were closed. I mean, we were under a crazy
right,
hard lockdown. Nothing was shipping, nothing was moving. Only thing you could get was food once a week, and it was nuts, And we don't have Amazon here in Vietnam right now, so we pulled out this $120 mic. No, it was not 120. It was like 2.5 mil. It was like what? Yeah, $150, and it new hit song for her, and no
yeah,
one knew. Granted, there is something to nicer tech. There is something to really good mics,
right.
but it doesn't have to be prohibitive like it used to be.
It comes second to a good performance.
Exactly.
You know, like a good performance will always take the cake. There's so many records that I can tell you that people love that they sound like crap, but it's a good song.
Yeah.
So
Well, that was like the thing too. Like, I have for filmmaking, right? All these people want the newest gear or this or that. And one of the things that people don't understand is that the prosumer camera now would smoke the pro camera 10 years ago. And they were still making movies on that, And like people are submitting movies for Sundance that were shot on iPhones, literally.
right,
And like, so there's nothing to stop an artist now from going out and not just making stuff, but changing the game.
oh yeah, and man, I have a friend, Zach Cervini. He's an incredible producer. The record he put out with John Blood, a lot of it they recorded it through the iPhone just because they thought it was funny. And like all the acoustic guitars, just put an iPhone and like track it that way, and run drums and run all this stuff through an iPhone and put it back in the session. That record did great.
Yeah.
Like, and it sounds awesome. It has a character,
Yeah.
and you can have access to whatever mics you want and whatever. But if that has a vibe, or you get creative with it, like who cares?
Yeah. Exactly. It's like, that's it. And, I think one of the things that's happened though, and the system has, for a long time, this is what I was talking about to my friend. What was the job of the gatekeepers? It was to feed the machine. And to feed the machine with standardized things. We were watching what was it? My wife and I were watching the movie Sister Act the other day. And what was funny, we were watching and like they were showing San Francisco and at that time. And there was this high school in San Francisco. And my wife was looking at it and we were watching the movie. And they cast it how they thought it should be cast. There was my wife is Vietnamese, and there was one Asian person in San Francisco.
Right.
One Asian person in San Francisco? I mean, like in the whole school, the class, they had one person. And it's like, not that we have to be, my point being that we live in a time now that you can be who you want. You can share what you want and you can show what you want.
Right.
And that there is this freedom to, and so again, coming back to the gatekeeper, that was my whole point. That was cast by people who thought things should look a certain way,
Right.
Or you go back to 80s movies where it was all white dudes. You know what I mean? It's like my daughter was like, loves Miles Morales. And she's like, he's like me, And I was like,
Right.
yeah, he is like you. You don't have to look. And she's like, why, Daddy, why do all the Avengers look like you? That's a good question. Huh? It's a good question to ask, you know? Because
Yeah.
people can tell the stories they want, and you can be who you want. And, you know, and this is why I love for film. I loved that Parasite won the best Oscar. Not the best foreign film, but the best movie. Because, come on, man, it was a great film. You can be anywhere.
Right.
You can be anyone. Just make what you believe in.
Right. I'm gonna play devil's advocate.
Oh,
for a
do
second.
tell. I love it, man.
The only thing I do miss from gatekeepers is that originally they were curators, right?
Oh, I have had this argument before. Continue. I love this.
You know, there was
Yes.
big investments that labels were doing,
Yes.
so they needed somebody to curate and filter all these people. Now, granted, now that's not the case because anybody can put the record out. You know, you get on DistroKid, you pay $30, and you put your record of
Yep.
myself screaming from the bathroom if I want to.
Yep.
So now the market is flooded,
Well,
and
and the gatekeepers have become the algorithms, the metrics.
not really, because the way that I see it is like everything is flooded, and the gatekeepers are still curating playlists. They're curating
Yes.
things that they're still favoring. What is it called? They're still favoring like the major record labels, but it's really hard now to find good indie artists,
Yeah.
and smaller artists. Like I feel like that middle class is just disappearing.
Yeah.
You know,
I think you're right.
they're either disappearing and getting bumped down into the world of SoundCloud, and they're
Yep.
like bottom of the playlist and stuff until you see all these artists now that like are breaking it on TikTok or
Yep.
doing things,
Yep.
and one of them pokes out and it's like, this is great, but then the attention span of people just kind of pushes them down again.
And I think that
Um,
you're hit on something too. There is like, and I was going to poke at this as well. I think the other thing that people are paying attention to, a perfect example, Logan Paul and Jake Paul. Like,
Right.
I'm not going to hate on them because I'm going to give them credit as being amazing businessmen. Like in a weird way, not a fan of what they do. I mean, like, let's go back to originally. How did Logan Paul break through? He did these weird videos of him doing the splits. He would walk out and be like, and just in the middle of the street and just do that. That was his thing. He was the splits guy. He would walk out in the middle of the street, they're filming, and he just drops into the splits. That was Logan Paul's whole spiel. And then, now there are huge segments of the gatekeepers, because the gatekeepers are still going to be the major record labels for music, and then for film are going to be the major talent agencies,
Right.
and they are just curating. Ooh, you know what it is? It's still Zoolander. Oh, Hansel, he's so hot right now. Like, that's it. That's our whole talent scheme. Is still that, and
Absolutely.
for better or worse, I don't.
But at the same time, it's like they're curating based on what people want,
Yeah.
or what they're accepting. Like, like you say, Sister Act at that time, like, there was no racial diversity on movies at all.
At all.
Like zero. Where now that's like that's like on the forefront of everybody.
Yeah.
To the point where they make fun of Disney for that, for example. Where it's like, because now that's what society determines they want. Curators have to look at that.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of that has to do with what we're doing as a society and the art that we are pushing.
Yeah.
The curators will only follow.
Yeah.
Every band you can think of that was huge and that got pushed through the gatekeepers, at some point that came from a scene that started somewhere.
Exactly.
Nobody wanted to touch Metallica when they were in LA in like 81.
Yep.
They went to San Francisco and they blew up to the point where the labels look at that and were like, oh, this is something now. It can be marketed.
And I think
But it took them 6 years.
And I think that's kind of the essence of what for creators that are sitting there thinking about how to break through. You have to go to like Gary Vaynerchuk's thing, keep crushing it.
Right.
You just have to, with your content, you have to be prolific. And at some point in time, you hit this breaking point. You tip the scales to a point where it just falls into place, and then everything kind of aligns with what you're creating, because I think that is the essence of what it's all about. Can you continue to not just, we live in a time now where you need to have a degree of regularity. And I know that for true artists like my wife, it's infuriating to just have to, all right, it's time to go to the studio. It's time to record. It's like, it turns it into this thing that is just so routine that, for someone like me, I'm a routine person. If I don't function on routine, like we went on vacation and the next day everyone came back at my house and everyone took an easy day. And I woke up, I said, 7 a.m., it's my 7 a.m. thing. I head down, I do this, I feed the dogs, I do this, I clean this, I straighten up. Because if I don't do that, I don't get anything done. But this is how I am able to accomplish anything in life.
Right.
Sean, to-do list. And I got it all right there. I don't get through it all every day. But if I don't have that, I'm so screwed.
I hear you. That's me.
I'm so done.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. How do you go about, what is your process for getting things done that you need to get done?
I'm very neurotic, so I feel like
I
have notebooks around the place where I always have like my list of things that have to happen. I try to schedule things if as they're coming. But for the most part, I just have like an infinite list of things that I want to accomplish, and I just bash my head against the wall until I finish it. But I mean, it's funny. My wife and I were just talking about this because we're very different. Where like she's tired, she like just goes and relax. Like that's fine. I'm like, I can't sit, and I know I have stuff to do, so I won't be relaxing. My brain is just going like.
We have similar spouses there. My wife yesterday, we needed to record because she has a new show coming up, and she's like, "Can you help me record?" So I was waiting for the engineer to send stuff over, and he finally sent us the track. I got everything set up, and she had come down, and I was in the middle of a business meeting, and I was like, "Just 1 second." The engineer didn't send it yet, but as soon as he sends it, I'll come get you. And she went upstairs, and she was just laying in bed, and she was like, and I was like, "Come on, it's time. I got things set up now. Time to go record." And she's like, "Now I'm tired." And I was like, "Oh God, God, come on, gotta go do this." And then she goes like, "But my wife, when my wife gets the mood, she's a whirlwind." But
oh yeah, absolutely. There's no stopping.
There's no just stopping. It's a force of nature, and it's just like, "Oh my God, get out of the way," And I'm like, "I've got my list. We need to stick to the list." And she's like, "I am nature.
Yeah.
Feel me." It's just like, okay, let's go with it.
Right.
Let's take your route. That's awesome. Yeah. But it's good for me, honestly, to have that, because it forces me to, again, get out of my comfort zone and try new things.
For sure.
Now,
it balances things out.
Right? And now, if you could go back in time and give some advice to your younger self, well, what advice would you give yourself?
It's a tough one. I will always say, like, be consistent, because I feel like that's the number one thing. Like, everybody tells you, or at least, where I grew up, like, we all think that you're going to get the one hit, or, you're going to get discovered, or there's going to be one thing that impacts your career and that you blow up overnight. And I don't think that's the case. I think, also like the whole thing of like hard work. It's like, sure, but you have to be consistent. Whatever you're doing, just keep on doing it, and just things get easier, and people start recognizing you for that one thing.
Yeah, exactly. Things get easier. Before we started this, it was interesting that this last year, I remember when I grew up singing, and this last year I wrote some songs for my wife and myself. It was the first time I wrote, and I just got the email from Spotify about this is how much visibility that song had, and it wasn't a ton,
right?
But it was way more than I had before that. And like,
right.
And if you can continue creating things, I'm making some new business cards, and throughout my entire career, I've had so many labels, in life, and then finally I settled on one tagline. What is my job? Creator. I make stuff. whether that be an ad campaign, whether that be a music video, whether that be a song, whether that be, you know, a pencil drawing. I mean, whatever it is, you create something. You know, it just is.
Right.
And I think so much we've entered into economies where people are either creators or curating of creators or guiding creators or helping people shape their creations. And I think that's a beautiful new economy that we've entered into, you know. Granted, and this is one thing that you had pointed out, like once we lost the gatekeepers, the quality went down. I think that we're now building a system to assist people realize their vision. Because, you know, as we evolve that vision, as we evolve, we want to help everyone get better because, you know, we don't want people embarrassing themselves too.
Right. And I think there's also now like influencers that can work as curators. You know, you just got to find your people that
Yeah.
have your taste or curate to your, you know, your needs.
Yeah.